Guten Abend, good evening, welcome to Literarisches Kolloquium Berlin. I'm very glad that two writers we really appreciate have come from Cologne here tonight, Karosh, Taha and Selim Özdoğan. They have been here with their books in German already, but tonight it's about the translations into English, the translations of the two novels In the Belly of the Queen by Karosh Taha and A Light Still Burns by Selim Özdoğan. And so it's about the translations, so I'm very happy to have the translators here as well. And I welcome Grashina Gabelmann, Ayça Türkoğlu and Katy Derbyshire, who will discuss about the books and about the translation process. This is at least what I hope for tonight. But what I hope is not really important, because what is important is what Deniz Utlu thinks about this evening. He will be the moderator, and I'm glad he's here. Deniz Utlu is a German language writer based here in Berlin. We've read two novels so far, and we are looking forward to reading his third novel this late summer. It will be presented also here at LCB, so check our program. I am very glad that LCB is not alone with this, but it's a cooperation with Toledo. Toledo is a program for and of literary translators, a network supporting events about translation. It's a project called Berlin City of Translators, and the event, this is why we have all these cameras here, is also part of a network called Literary Beyond Borders, and this project links literary institutions in Istanbul, Oslo, Berlin, Diyarbakir and Czernowitz, and whoever is with us in one of these cities, welcome to LCB. But now it's Deniz Utlu's turn, and I'm glad to have you all here. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Thorsten. Good evening, everybody, online and here at the Wannsee. It's very unusual for me to speak a foreign language in the LCB, which is a very important venue in the German-speaking literature scene, but it is also very important for translators. So it's now the translation side of the venue that I'm visiting, and I'm very happy about it. So we have the title of this event called Kurdish-German and Turkish-German Literary Lives in English. And we are going to talk about two books and their translations, as Thorsten has already said. And then, if there's enough space and time, we'll also discuss more general topics on translation of contemporary German literature or German-speaking literature into the English world. We'll start with, we'll start with Karosh's book. And then we'll talk about Selim, if this is okay for everybody. So, and I will do the introductions while we are discussing the topics, because there are so many people on stage, otherwise this may take too long. But I'll start with Karosh Taha. This is her second book, In the Belly of the Queen, im Bauch der Königin. The first book is called Beschreibung einer Krabbenwanderung. And as far as I know, you're writing your third novel right now. So, while writing your third novel, your second novel was translated in this beautiful book series at Während Tahas Books. And it's translated by Grashina Gabelmann, who said I'm allowed to call her G on stage. Okay, so it's translated by G. G is editor-in-chief and the founding member of Flaneur magazine, and also interdisciplinary and it's an interdisciplinary and award-winning publication, and it's focusing on one street per issue, which I found very interesting. And she also writes, so psychogeographic prose, and she's a translator, obviously. Let me briefly tell you something. Let me briefly introduce Karosh's novel before we talk about it. So, there's one thing there are many things which are special about this book and about about Karosh's writing in general. But there's also something very unusual about it, and this is that it's up to you how to start to read this book. Let's say the experience you'll have is your decision. Like if you start on the one side, you'll have another experience than if you start on the other side, or it's coincidence. We don't know. Either way, you'll have a different experience depending on where you start the book. And if you start it on the one side, you'll have a narrator called Amal, and if you start on the other side, you have a narrator called Rafik. And they both have a friend or let's call it friend, who's called Yunus. And Yunus' mother, Shahira, is I would say, the secret main character of the book. And G, I would like to ask you if you had to become two translators in order to translate this book, because, as I said, it's two different experiences, two different narrators. We could discuss if two different stories. How was this experience how did you deal with this?
I think I dealt with it very intuitively, and for no particular reason, I started with Amal's story, and I was so drawn into it that I read her piece entirely, and I could already hear myself translating in my head while I was reading, and I was in such a flow with it that I decided to not read the other side before I started translating, which, I thought maybe wasn't a good idea, and that I might be missing out on some information, but I just felt this like pull and flow, and so I translated one whole side before ever reading the other one.
So you didn't know the other side at all when you started translating it?
No, I don't think. Maybe my memory is incorrect, but that's how I remember doing it. Yeah.
And how did it feel then to switch side after translating Amal? Were you shocked? Like, who's this Rafik? What's going on now?
It's so bad. No, it's. I mean, because the two narrators they're completely different people and think differently, speak differently. The writing style is complete. It's very different. So I think it kind of made sense to do it that way in the end. To just dive really deep into one character first and then the next, and maybe not muddle the two up.
I will not ask you if you are more affected towards one of them. Of course, I'm curious, but I will not ask you this. I have another question for you. When I was reading Karosh's novel, I thought it's a very specific environment that is described there. It's West German suburbia. It's like mainly migratory environment, more or less young people in the center. Of course, there are older ones as well. And translating, of course, doesn't only mean to translate words. It means to translate contexts. So how was it difficult to translate this context into the English-speaking world, or for the English-speaking world?
Yeah, I mean, there was a few moments where Katy and I were in discussion with each other, because Katy is also the editor of this book. The word that comes to mind is Allmann, which pretty much everyone probably in a German context understands what it means. And we were discussing back and forth if a readership that is from the UK or from other English-speaking countries would understand what that means. And if not, like, how do you translate a word so specific with so much meaning? And that's very much related to its context. I remember we also started talking to another translator.
Oh, was it? I wondered why you touched my back. Yeah. Yeah. So we had a three-way conversation about it.
Sorry, I didn't remember. And in the end, we chose to keep the word, right? Yeah, because we thought you could figure it out, and that it's also probably the type of person reading this book would also be curious enough to look it up if they didn't know. But yeah, so there were several things like that where it was interesting and a bit like a puzzle piece to figure out if it could work in the English-speaking context.
I mean, this aspect is indeed super interesting, especially when we are thinking about Karosh's prose. Sorry, Karosh, we are talking now about you and not with you, but I have questions for you as well, and you can interrupt us anytime. It's interesting, especially concerning Karosh's prose, I think, because my reading of your books, Karosh, is like you really try to avoid, or you do avoid, additional explanations for, let's say, a wide audience. Like things that people wouldn't know because they don't have this experience, you try not to explain, and usually you don't. I think usually you don't explain them. And now this book that is or your prose that may already be challenging for some audiences gets translated for another audience, where again things have to be explained. I mean, I feel like this is really, in some sense, it's a translation of a translation of a translation, although it's only German to English, but there are many steps of a translation. So, but I guess that was also the pleasure part of it, maybe, or like, did you like this, or?
Yeah. I thought it was very playful, and especially translating a bunch of teenagers just talking to each other, using slang, kind of making fun of each other, teasing each other. That was really fun, and finding the equivalent English expressions. I enjoyed it.
And could we listen to an excerpt?
Yeah. Do you want to choose? Should I do Amal or Rafik, or should I choose?
Well, if you want, well, what would you choose?
I'll go with Amal.
That's what I would have chosen as well, but I love Rafik as well.
Sorry, I'm just getting over a flu. My father's definitely not forgotten Shahira. No one forgets Shahira. Shahira's not a neighbor. She's not a woman. She's not a person. She's an idea, and everyone in the neighborhood sees Shahira. Everyone creates their own stories about Shahira when she walks past. Shahira doesn't stop walking around in our minds, and her shoes are worn out. That's how far she's had to walk. Somewhere along the street, she needs to take off her shoes, and she continues walking barefoot. And when the soles of her feet start hurting, she sits down in our minds, and 5 men rush to massage her feet and legs. And Shahira told me how she learned to walk. She always told me stories on my birthday because she doesn't buy presents. She gets given presents. But women give each other stories, she said. And she once told me how she learned to walk. It started with the short dress. A short dress transformed Shahira into a woman. She just wanted to tan her legs in the park because she didn't have a balcony. Yunus wasn't yet born. He existed as a clump of blood in her belly, and he hadn't yet widened her waist. That girl-like waist shifted after birth, and her body was no longer where it once was. Shahira simply wanted to tan her legs and coincidentally learned to walk. She showed skin for the first time, and at first she thought everyone was staring at her until she remembered that no one knew her, and she was in an unknown place, and women walk in the unknown wearing short dresses, and Shahira placed one foot in front of the other and breathed in the park's air, which smells of nothing, because this unknown country is like a doll's house without a smell. People must be staring, Shahira thinks. No, it's a doll's house. And then she thinks, look at my legs and my glowing white skin touched by the sun for the first time. And Shahira strokes her arms reverently, their whiteness hurting people's eyes, and she continues walking around wearing a short dress. And no one knows Shahira. And because no one knows her, she feels no shame for her body, and the dents in her arms lose their meaning. The few black dots on her legs grow smaller, and Shahira's all alone, though the park is full of people. She's alone, she's with herself, she's for herself, she is herself. She's not Shahira Shafiq, the daughter of Anisa and Ramazan. She's not a woman, she's not a person. She's much more, and she's nothing. She walks and she breathes and she's there, and above her is God saying, look at my creation, admire it. And Shahira walks and will never stop walking, and we say goodbye. Once when Yunus and I played PlayStation, and we got thirsty and I ran out onto the balcony to grab a bottle of Coke, I spotted Shahira through the gap in the curtain as she remembered the day she learned to walk. She was naked, and her nakedness enveloped the man beneath her like the ocean. He was hardly visible, drowning in Shahira. Shahira raged within her own body, reached for her light brown nipples, for her soft thighs with white stretch marks, for her stomach, and again for her stomach, as if devouring the drowning man. And she looked at her arms and revealed her sweaty neck with her hungry hands. And the hungry hands touched her breasts and reached between her legs. And all her movements created a throbbing sensation between my legs. I wanted to go home to lock myself in the bathroom and do nothing all day but think of Shahira's body. I grabbed the bottle of Coke and poured it in glasses for us. And I played Street Fighter with Yunus, and I lost. And he made fun of me, and I trudged home, and I ate. And my mother asked me what was wrong, and I answered in a daze, which troubled her. And she felt my forehead and said I was sweating and should take a cold shower.
Thank you very much. How does it feel to listen to this, Karosh? Still your words, or?
Yes, of course they are my words, but there is this strange sensation of, I don't know, there is a distance, just because it was translated, even though when she reads the translation, I translated back to German. And I would have never guessed that I'm kind of emotionally attached to German. But I guess I am now. Yeah, it's strange. There is still like a distance to my own story.
So you sense the emotional attachment to the German language when listening to your own text read in a foreign language? That's what happened?
Yes.
That's interesting.
I didn't know that either. So.
How does, like, we just heard or we just witnessed Shahira through the eyes of Amal in what she has read. And you can see that there's a fascination, obviously, Amal's for Shahira. But Rafiq is also fascinated by Shahira. How does their fascination differ? What is different in their fascination?
You're asking me?
I'm asking you, yeah, if I may.
No, it's okay. Well, Rafiq is a young man or a boy, as you would define it. So he's very influenced, and his language is very much influenced by how a man should perceive a woman and how a man should desire a woman. And so the way he perceives Shahira is through this masculine language of perceiving not a person but a woman and her body, the way she talks, the way she moves, and the way other people see her. I think that's his problem, and that's the ambivalence of there is, on the one hand, there is this desire for her to be with her as a person because he admires her, but on the other hand, because she is refused by society and by their morals, he says that he hates her, and that every time something happens to his best friend Yunus, he feels even more hate for that woman, as he would say. So yeah, there is a big ambivalence, and in Amal's case, it's different because, of course, she as a female person, and she knows how female persons are perceived, and the struggle of being and growing up as a female person. So she has more, she's more understanding, and she never says something like "I hate Shahira," but she sees Shahira independently from Yunus, and yeah, for her, she exists as a person, even though in that abstract, the passage was like she's not a woman, she's not a person, but because in her mind she's this big idea of, actually, it sounds a little bit cliche, but freedom, and how she would like to be without being this very overly sexualized person, but more like the idea of someone that does not care about society seeing her as merely a body, is very attractive to Amal.
Although I have to say, in my reading experience, there's the truth in the desire, in Rafiq's desire as well. So there is, there are all those images in his head that are not his, but the ones that the society has implanted, or his surroundings have implanted into his mind. But in his desire for her, which he sometimes also doesn't accept, there's also something like truth. So it's, in both I felt like in both ways of desiring, Amal's way and Rafiq's way, there is something which is also free.
Yes, I would definitely agree. I think it's for them also very hard to see her in the eyes of the society or of their community, because they grew up with her and experienced her, or experience also her being a mother to Yunus. There is this scene where Rafiq and Yunus are playing, and she plays also with them, and at one point she's covering them, and he feels like really, what's geborgen?
Protected, maybe. Protected?
See, this is my problem with English. It's not quite the word, because geborgen means like someone, yes, protecting you, but also hiding you, but in a very warm way. This is for me the connection with, and he feels this feeling, and it's like almost Shahira is this big person and strong person and someone who he could look up to, but I think this opportunity is kind of taken from him just by how society sees her.
I could talk for hours with you about this issue, about like the intersection of the body and words, and how this intersection is mirrored in contemporary German literature, and how your work intervenes. Maybe we'll do that another time. Because now I would like to ask you to read us a very short passage in German.
Yes.
And then we'll continue with A Light Still Burns.
I will also read Amal's part, even though I was thinking about Rafiq, because I don't want there to be an imbalance or injustice, but I will go with Amal. Und immer fragten sie mich, wie ich es angestellt hatte, den neuen Jungen, der wesentlich größer und stärker war, zu verprügeln. Und ich erzählte, weil mir jeder zuhörte und mich glauben ließ, etwas Bedeutendes vollbracht zu haben. Und ich erzählte, weil die Männer sich freuten und die Frauen sich ärgerten, weil mein Vater mich auf den Schoß nahm und mich aufforderte, die Geschichte seinen Männerfreunden zu erzählen, als wäre sie eine seiner Anekdoten, als wäre ich seine Handpuppe. Aber es ist meine Geschichte, hätte ich beinahe gesagt, hätte mich beinahe umgedreht zu meinem Vater und ihm gesagt, das ist meine Geschichte. Ich war noch jung genug, Männerrunden zum Lachen zu bringen, aber zu alt, um auf jemandes Schoß zu sitzen, auch wenn er mein Vater war und auch wenn er mich einlud, auf seinem Schoß zu sitzen, weil sie immer fragten, wie ich es angestellt hatte, den neuen Jungen, der wesentlich größer und stärker war, zu verprügeln. Und ich erzählte, manchmal fiel mir ein neues Detail ein und ich erfand neue Details, weil ich wollte, dass sie mir zuhören. Irgendwann sagten auch die Männer, ihr müsst auf sie Acht geben. Und da hörte mein Vater auf, mich wie eine Handpuppe auf seinen Schoß zu setzen, und auch weil meine Mutter ihn abends dafür ausschimpfte. Jede Nacht schrien sie sich an und Mutter schloss alle Fenster und die Balkontür, und die Hitze beschlug die Fenster, die Hitze rann an den Scheiben hinab, die weinten, weil es sonst niemand tat. Mein Vater öffnete nach dem Streit die Fenster und die Wohnung konnte wieder atmen und ich konnte schlafen, um am nächsten Tag den älteren Jungen im Viertel zu erzählen, wie ich den neuen Jungen verprügelt hatte, weil sie mich danach gefragt hatten. Einer hielt noch seinen Fußball unter dem Arm. Sie unterbrachen ihr Spiel nur, um zu hören, wie ich davon erzählte, den neuen Jungen verprügelt zu haben. Und einer von den Jungen fragte mich, ob ich ihm meinen Bizeps zeigen könne, und ich wusste nicht, was das ist. Da schob er den kurzen Ärmel seines Shirts ein wenig hoch und beugte den Arm, strengte sich an, eine Kugel auf dem Arm zu bilden, und ich machte es ihm nach und brachte damit alle zum Lachen. Und ein anderer fragte, ob ich ihm meinen Schwanz zeigen könne, und da lachten wieder alle und widmeten sich ihrem Spiel. Ich erzählte es auch den Lehrerinnen, die danach fragten, und weil sie bestürzt schauten, verkürzte ich die Geschichte, sparte mir Details, vor allem den erfundenen, und sie sagten dann, ich solle keine Freude bei dem Gedanken an diese Tat empfinden, und ich empfand keine Freude, nur das Gefühl, etwas Bedeutendes vollbracht zu haben.
Dankeschön, Karosh. So now there's an introduction to be made, which is not that easy. I'll start with Ayça Türkoğlu, one of the two translators of A Light Burns by Selim Özdoğan. She's a literary translator from German and Turkish. Her work has been shortlisted for the Helene and Kurt Wolf Translators Prize, and she lives in North London, which is Hackney.
No, Haringey. But it's an important piece of information. That's why it's there. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll dig into that in a minute. Katy lives in Berlin. Let's keep it geographically, since more than 20 years. Almost like me, I'm living here since almost 20 years. And I want to have a personal parenthesis here. I met Katy about 10 or maybe even longer, 15 years ago, at a reading of Selim Özdoğan, who I had invited to the Werkstatt der Kulturen. I don't even remember which book it was of all the books he has written. I'm saying this in order to illustrate this long literary journey of Selim Özdoğan. When I moved to Berlin in 2003, and I wanted to become a writer, there were really only a few names out there that you would know that have a Turkish sound. And despite the really older ones, there were maybe two names, two or three, and one of them was Selim Özdoğan. And I remember sitting in a cafe in Kreuzberg, wanting to organize a reading series, and we were thinking, like, what could we do, like German Turkish literature, what is out there, Feridun Saimoğlu, and then the guy who was organizing the cafe and wanted to have those cultural events came to me with, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 books, and said, well, this is a writer who really touched me. And I didn't know Selim Özdoğan. I met him through this cafe experience, and the first book I read was Es ist so einsam im Sattel, seit das Pferd tot ist. How is this? Okay. But then there were others like Nirgendwo und Hormone, Meer, then short stories. And I feel like you're out there since, you know, I and many friends of me are searching for a language, and there's always been this guy who already did it. So this is why I was very happy when I heard that this trilogy was translated by Ayça Türkoğlu and Katy Derbyshire, who is a translator of books from writers like Clemens Meyer, Christa Wolf, Heike Geisler, Olga Gresnova, and many others, I guess. And you're also editor at Wohland and Quist, right? So you're kind of also the curator of the series. We'll talk about this later. And this is A Light Still Burns. It's the third book of the trilogy. The first one, I would say the first one is actually a classic in German Turkish literature, The Blacksmith's Daughter. It's one of those 3, 4, or 5 books that you should read if you want to know more or think about German-Turkish literature in the last 60 years or so. And the second book in this series was in this trilogy is Heimstraße 52, which is translated as Factory Lane 52.
Yeah, 52 Factory Lane.
52 Factory Lane. And now it's A Light Still Burns. And my first question to the two of you, Ayça and Katy, is, are you sad?
What, just generally? Or. And that's the first joke of the night.
Yeah. Terribly, terribly sad.
Yeah, we're really sad.
I think because we've left these characters behind, but because it was so special working together, and we spent every summer working together. I mean,
spring.
Remotely, you know, but...
Yeah, I'm frankly appalled that we don't get to work on them anymore. This is not how the year's supposed to start. It's supposed to be spring, we're working together, we're translating a book, everything's good. There's a pandemic, no. Yeah, and it's sad, it's like the end of multiple relationships. Well, not the end, but we don't get to work. Goodbye forever. We don't get to, work as intimately, and also we don't get to think about the characters every day.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know them, and I've been looking for them.
When did this journey start? When did you translate the first book of the trilogy?
So we did one a year. So really, we literally when
2020,
was it?
21, 22.
Yeah. And so every year was full of this family for us.
And how did it work for you to work together?
It was really easy.
Yeah. So the books have this anecdotal structure. So I think the first time, before we started the first book, I divided it up into little chunks, and we took turns to translate one. I think I did the first one, and you did the second chunk, and there aren't chapters, but there are. It's like the books are like somebody from your family telling you stories from their lives. And then we did the same thing with the second one, and with the third book, Ayça had the annoying job of dividing up the sections. And then what did we do after that?
Then we just put the words in English, and then read it through again. And then
we edited each other as we were going along.
They print it in a like a place, and then they put them all together.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry about this. No, then we would go through. We would send the books. So we'd do like 1,000 words at a time or so, and then we would send them to each other, and the other person would read through and make notes. And some of the time that we would be kind of making suggestions, but a lot of the time it was kind of like, it was a very like intimate relationship. And so a lot of the time we were kind of just enjoying the book together and talking about the book and gossiping. And I think we very quickly developed a kind of shared language for the book, I think. That was really quick. And we seemed to quite naturally agree. We'd be like, I don't think Gula would say this. I don't think this would like. So it was a very kind of relaxed experience, wasn't it? And then we just read it through together at the end. And then we sent it to the place where they put it on the paper.
That's very technical. I mean, I wonder. The language of the books is a poetic decision, right? So depending on who translates the book, it will have probably a different poetology behind it. But you could agree somehow without yelling and screaming. You kind of had the same vision for the translation
We did, I think, because it was very much led by the characters. And they all have individual voices, although it's as a single narrator. But there's a lot of dialogue. And perhaps because there were 3 books worth that we could ingest before we started translating, and perhaps because I have known these books since 2007. I don't know when the first one came out. Do you remember?
2003?
Just a long time.
5?
2005. They've been with me a long, long time. I don't know, did you feel that your own family came in? Sorry, I'm doing your job for you.
Thank you. Ask me something about North London as well.
Sorry about this. Did you feel that your own family came into it?
Which side, the English ones or the Turkish ones?
Well, maybe both.
I think the English ones came in a lot. The sort of history of sort of family storytelling and things and the way that stories are passed down, that was very... But I think these are books where I think everyone can recognise I don't know, like you were saying that you've got this anecdotal structure. So everyone has an experience of being told this story through lots of different people, like how Gül is always talking about the rings underneath her mum's eyes before she died and stuff, and that becomes like something that's returned to, and it becomes something that other family members will know almost as if they saw it, and that's the same, I think, in so many families.
And you, Katy?
Yeah, my family's great storytellers, yeah. Definitely. I hadn't thought about it before, but yeah, there's a lot of often repeated anecdotes. Maybe everyone can relate to that. Yeah.
Share one. Tell us one. Okay, I've got one. Apparently, once when my nan was moving house, she lived in a very rural place, and the only way to move from place to place was to this was the 30s. The only way to move from place to place was just to put your stuff in a big carriagey thing and trundle it along a country road. And my nan was about 3 years old, and she was responsible for moving the kittens from one house to the next house. And so she was pushing these little kittens along the road on this country lane in a pram, and they kept jumping out. And that's the story. And Selim could have written that.
Absolutely.
Then let's see what Selim has written.
We're going to share the job.
Please.
We have 2 passages, and they're both great. The TV is on most of the time since Fuat got a satellite dish. It beggars belief, Fuat said while he was installing it. Look at what's going on up there in space. You turn the dish a centimetre too far to the left, and suddenly they're all speaking Arabic. A centimetre to the right, and it's all in Russian. May these Germans, Japanese, and Americans never have to suffer. They're not changing the world, they're changing outer space. TV, telephone, satellite dishes, planes, the world gets smaller and richer every day.
Gül doesn't sit down to watch programmes very often, but she has them on while she's doing the housework, while she's at the window, while she's knitting, and she keeps tracks of shows where people fall in love, are drunk with happiness, pale with envy, eaten up by jealousy and resentment. She sees fears, cares, hardships, quarrels, fights. She sees what has always fascinated people, someone getting into difficulties and then finding their way back out, or finding happiness and losing it again.
Window or TV, there's no great difference except that she knows a few people here and there out on the street. She thinks back to the times when Nachbarn in Europa was the only Turkish program on TV, for 20 minutes every Saturday. Now she has 8 Turkish channels to choose from, and she doesn't even know what's on German TV these days. They used to watch German programs and learn German, whether they wanted to or not. Then came video recorders, and anyone who had once quenched their thirst for new things with American movies started quenching their thirst for home with Turkish films. And now the TV has slaked all that thirst, has become a window for looking into the lives of strangers.
People's heads are empty, Yilmaz says. Take a look around you. Is there a single Turkish video shop left? No. because we've all got satellite TV. Like a soap opera is the same as a film. Like you could compare those models reeling off their lines with proper actors. All anyone wants is a moving image. They're addicted to distraction from their own emptiness. Look, the Germans are more cultured than us. There's a video shop on every corner. They don't just watch TV. I have to watch Turkish films dubbed into German because our heads are all empty.
I can see from my window who goes in the video shop, Goethe thinks. They don't look all that cultured. But she says nothing and wonders whether her head is empty too. She watches life on the street and she listens to life in the shows, but she doesn't talk much herself. She talks to the young women in the car on the way to work, a few words of German with Herr Binder, and she talks to her friends Zania and Yilmaz and their daughter Sevgi, who wears makeup these days. The girl always has a subtle scent of expensive perfume and has started talking back to adults, much to her father's delight. Gül talks to her older daughter Jada. She meets up with Can in the department store cafe every 2 or 3 weeks. She talks to her younger daughter Ceren on the phone. It sounds like a lot to her. It seems like a lot to her when she counts it all up, but it's not much.
Back on Factory Lane, Gül knew all her neighbours. All she had to do was leave the house if she fancied a chat. Now she has more free time, but less contact with people. Perhaps it's because I'm getting old, she thinks. I can't make friends as quickly. These days, I know people's flaws and lies, their dreams, hopes and disappointments, almost as well as I know my own hands and feet, and I'm not as curious anymore. I've seen the same things again and again over the years. They haven't changed, but my eye for them is sharper now.
Sometimes she talks to Zania about the shows they watch, and Gül wonders whether it has to do with more than just their feelings of emptiness. They're only made-up characters, but the two women think about them a lot. Sonay shouldn't have kept her cleaning job a secret. Yes, but she only wanted to help her nephew get his operation. But her husband would never have let her do it. Too right, a primary teacher's wife going cleaning with his permission. What would people think? But that's the reality over there. He just doesn't earn enough. Everyone knows that. And then when a wife takes a cleaning job, they start bad-mouthing her. She shouldn't have let herself get caught, Gül says.
She's amazed to hear words like that coming from her own mouth. She's amazed that she means it too. She shouldn't have let herself get caught. Her husband would never have found out how the money for the operation was raised. She shouldn't have got caught. That's not emptiness. The show brings something out from the inside of Gül.
So we're going to skip a couple of decades, maybe, or a decade or so. It's a fast-paced book. When he comes home the next day, Fuat's face is a picture of pride and joy. He looked like this when he bought his first big Nordmender TV, when he was the first person to own a video recorder on their street, when the satellite dish was installed. He looked like this when he came home with his first used Mercedes. He looked like this the first time he brought that expensive diet powder home with him, the one he still drinks twice a week. But today Fuat says nothing, and Gül doesn't ask questions, though she knows she'd be doing him a favour.
Call this number here, Fuat eventually says.
Whose number is it?
Just call the number.
You call it.
Oh, woman, just dial the number, will you? You can't always know everything in advance. It's a surprise.
Why should I call someone I don't know? What's this funny number anyway? Where's that code for?
Fuat sighs, picks up the phone and dials. There's a ringing from inside his jacket pocket and he takes out a mobile phone, beaming.
Whose is that?
He sighs again and sits down. Whose do you think? Probably that woman who choked on her stepmother's poison apple. Or was it the 7 dwarfs with the 14 arms? Mine, it's my phone.
What's it for?
Well, it's no good for shaving, so I thought I'd use it to make phone calls.
But we've got a phone.
Why do I bother trying to talk to you? This is the future. You can't even see it when it's right in front of your nose. Wait and see. In a couple of years, you'll have one too. Haven't you noticed more and more people walking around with mobile phones? That's progress. You can put your phone in your pocket now and take it everywhere you go. We used to dial until our fingers got sore, and then they invented push buttons. Then we used to trip over the cables until they got rid of the wires. The Germans, the Japanese, the Americans, they're changing the world, but my wife's fast asleep.
I bet it's expensive.
It makes your life easier. It's a kind of translator you can take along everywhere. And they're getting cheaper and cheaper.
But it's for business people, she wanted to say, but she interrupts herself. Or for criminals like Jan. Why would she need something like that? Nice that you've got something new, she says. She smiles. It's easiest to understand him when he's indulging his simple pleasures. But that won't stop her asking Jada how much these mobile phones cost.
There's actually an economic history of technology in the books if we look at it from that lens, with that lens. But there's also something not about the economic history, but also something about music that I would like to talk with Selim. I remember when I read the Blacksmith's Daughter when it came out, that there was this word Anatolischer Blues. At that time I read, I was like, wow, cool, Anatolischer Blues. What does it mean? But I could relate to it. But for me, it was much more than a musical category. It was more like something like a symbol of something. I don't know, like a metaphor for a feeling of a generation. So I thought about this, about the Anatolian blues, and then I read somewhere, I think, am I wrong, in the description of the trilogy, somewhere you also say the trilogy of Anatolian blues. So what is the Anatolian blues?
There are these tales. The oldest written Turkish tales are the Dede Korkut tales, and they are from the 8th and 9th century, and the written version, it is believed that they were transmitted orally, and the written version is from, I don't know, 14th century maybe. And there you have like 12 very basic hero tales. There's this one hero who conquers all the enemies, kills everyone, and wins in the end. It's basically how these hero tales work. But the ending is usually, but where are they now? They are all dead. This feeling of the Greek tales don't end like that. That feeling of, yeah, you can do everything and you can gain fame and be strong, but in the end we all die. And in the end it's all death and sorrow and separation. That's the Anatolian blues, and it's rooted there. At the same time, well, I think it's rooted there. It began maybe way before these Dede Korkut tales, but this feeling of it's all in vain has been there. And if you're watching Netflix, watch the Turkish productions. You don't know how they end. Usually with American productions, European productions, you have the happy end. With the Turkish, modern day Netflix productions, death, sorrow, separation.
My mother always says, if you ask a question, you have to be strong enough to bear the answer. I should have thought twice before asking you this.
Well, one more maybe funny thing about it, Anatolian blues. The man who coined the term Anatolischer Blues is Jörg Fauser.
That I didn't know. You said when you were describing the Anatolian blues, among many things, you used the word longing. And I wouldn't go so far to say in general in your books, but I mean, I have to think about it, but especially in this trilogy, it is also a trilogy of longing. So longing plays a huge role in it. Is longing a driver for your writing?
Yes, but I strongly believe that we all long for a kind of infinity. It doesn't end with death and sorrow and separation. There's something more, something bigger, and we all long for it because on some level we know there must be something more than our everyday experiences.
And I feel like on some level, Gül, the protagonist of all three books, actually knows that as well. There's a short paragraph that I would like to quote in English, because when I read it in English, I felt like I understood the German version in a different way. It was an interesting experience. Not like in a wrong way, but I felt like there is an interpretation in it, which which felt familiar. And it has something to do with the Anatolian blues, and it has something to do with the influence of music in your writing. And I just quote it. Photos can quench the longing of our eyes. A telephone can quench the longing of our ears. But it's letters that quench the longings of the heart. Reading the words over and over again, we come closer to something. As the words come from one heart, traveling through hands onto paper and stream into our hearts through our eyes. They flow through hands and arms, which are extensions of the heart, because the heart is nourished by touch, by fingers stroking cheeks, by hands transferring warmth, by arms laid around others, by shoulders leaning on other shoulders. I read this and I was, first I felt like, wow, this is like, it is, for me, it is already blues, it is a song, although it is prose. And then I thought, I really want to ask you if the books you're writing are letters for you. Is this a letter? Because in this passage,
well,
it says letter, but it felt like it's talking about the book, about the novel.
I can't really write letters or a diary anymore. It doesn't work because I write texts. It's about how does it work? What do I have to do to make it work on the page? And that's not the way you write letters, and that's not the way you write a diary. So I'm not really writing letters in that sense. But in a way, as a writer, you're trying to write the same if you want to or not. And it doesn't really matter how much you try to make one book look different from another. You're always writing the same book again and again and again. That's the song you have to sing. In that sense, it is a letter. It comes from somewhere inside me, and it wants to be expressed on a page or spoken. But there's a very technical side. When I sit down and write, I can't write a letter. So if I try to write a letter to a friend, even that doesn't really work.
I was close to ask, how is it with emails? But
Emails are usually very technical. Yeah, 15 o'clock, I'll be there. Or yes, that much money, I will come.
it's true, your mails are very brief.
Yeah, usually.
So I quoted it in English. We heard passages in English. Do you have a passage for us in German?
I chose a very short passage, which has to do with all the things we talked about. Wir wollen alle einen Platz, an dem wir uns ausruhen können, von dem, was sie Theater nennt. Die ganze Welt ist eine Fremde. Wir kommen hierher und suchen und suchen. Wir fluchen auf das Geld, das Schicksal. Wir sticken im Dunkel der Einsamkeit Bilder, auf denen niemand etwas erkennen kann. Wir leben in Angst, dass uns etwas an Liebe entgeht, an Geborgenheit, an Geld. Wir haben Angst vor den Verlusten und der Trennung. Wir sorgen uns um unsere Kinder und wir nennen es Leben. Wie lange währt es schon? Ein paar Atemzüge haben wir hier und wir verbringen es mit Rennerei. Gott wird dieses Geschenk wieder an sich nehmen. Weißt du, die Menschen kommen sich klug vor. Auch diese Aziza, sie glauben, sie seien weiß Gott wie schlau. Aber sie sind es nicht. Auch die gelesen haben, sind es nicht. Die Juden bei uns im Dorf haben erzählt, wie Moses 10 Gebote vom Berg heruntergebracht hat. So steht es auch bei uns, aber bei uns steht nirgendwo, wie die Gebote lauten. Die Juden kennen die Gebote, aber es sind gar keine Gebote, sondern Begehren, die jeden Menschen ereilen. Den Namen des Herrn missbrauchen, andere Götter haben, lügen, töten, stehlen, begehren, neidisch sein. Warum sollte Moses 40 Tage und Nächte gebraucht haben, um das herauszufinden? Gott, vergib mir, aber ich glaube, die Wahrheit steht nicht in Büchern, auch nicht in unserem. Die Geschichten, die wir erzählen, sind nur ein Spiegel unserer Herzen. Und wer direkt ins Herz schauen kann, der liest das richtige Buch.
Thank you very much. As a final part of our evening, I would like to briefly talk with all of you, about what contemporary German-speaking literature actually has to offer outside of Germany. What is, like, from a German-speaking writing perspective, like, what are your, what do you want from non-German-speaking readers? And from the translators, I would like to know, like, what is the reason? Like, Katy, let's start with you, as also an editor and curator. What do you aim for?
Yeah, because I have the amazing fortune and privilege of choosing the titles that we publish with V&Q Books, I'm trying to fill in gaps, I think, to some extent, in what makes it into English out of German. I have to admit, I don't speak any other languages, so this is all I have to choose from. And I'm sure, you know, other languages have amazing books too. I know they do. So to some extent, that's guided by my own reading experiences and personality. So I lean towards kind of working class narratives, which I think don't make it into English very often from German. There's a sense of humor that I'm aware of in German writing, some German writing, which I would like for English-speaking readers to notice, and also, although this is changing a little bit, most writers in the past who've been translated into German have been white. So we're trying to break that down a little bit. I've always been interested in getting more women translated. Generally, the ratio of men to women translated is 2/3 men and 1/3 women, and you know, with the tiny amount of power I have been trying to change that. But of course, I also have a kind of very personal and emotional relationship to all of these books especially those that I've translated, but also those that like In the Belly of the Queen, that are just my choice, and other people get to translate them, and something magic just happens there, which I can't explain. That just grabs me.
And is it different for let's say a non-German speaking reader in the suburbia of London or any other city in Great Britain to interfere with German-speaking literature that deals with class issues in Germany? Like, is there something that they can experience that is different than they would experience when reading English-speaking writers?
I don't think so necessarily. I think that actually cuts across language, that class structure. Although obviously there are. I was speaking to actually strangely to Austrian writers who say, "Oh, we have this kind of everyone looks down on people from the countryside," and that would probably be slightly different in the UK. As somebody from almost the countryside, would you agree? No. I mean, there are differences. You know, there are. Each society has its own peculiarities, but I think that does cut across that class structure.
G, how is it from a magazine perspective? Like, you know, is it as editor of the Flaneur, would you look for German-speaking writers, or is that not the way how you approach the issues that?
Yeah, I don't think it applies to the way we work with Flaneur, since we always go to a different city in a different country and then intuitively choose a street, and then all the contributors from different disciplines are people we organically meet along the way. So I don't think, we don't choose, like the things organically happen. But that said, in the Paris issue we released last week, Karosh wrote a really beautiful piece, because Karosh now lives in Paris. Karosh's piece is the only one, because Flaneur is bilingual, so every issue's in English and in the local language. So this one is French and English, and Karosh's piece is the only one that's in 3 languages. We also decided to print the original in German. That really didn't answer your question, but it's just...
No, but it didn't answer the question, but it broadened the picture because, it made me think like, intuitively, it totally makes sense to me to have Karosh's words in a magazine issue that is dedicated to a street in Paris. At the same time, of course, there are many writers living, French-speaking writers living in Paris. So I wonder, what is the contribution in terms of aesthetics? And I'm sure there is one, and we don't have to answer this question now. It can be, left as a question. But I just wonder if you, as translators, feel like that there is something aesthetically spoken that, let's put it even more narrowly, like German, Turkish, Kurdish, German, Turkish, German, Kurdish literature can contribute aesthetically to international literature. But yeah, you can leave it as a question. You don't have to answer it. It's something that I'm thinking about a lot.
But all I can say is that these two books are, as you've noticed, very, very different. And I don't know whether they're representative of a Kurdish-German or a Turkish-German literature, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, I mean, these are, questions. I don't want to go there. Of course, they're very different, but I think there's a contribution of, let's say it like, really put it like this, non-white German writing to say how to deal with body, how to describe sensuality. But this is too much for now, for the end of the discussion. Before finishing, I really would like to know from the two of you, Selim and Karosh, what does it mean for you to be translated? I mean, is it important? Why is it important?
Important for what?
For you.
Yeah, but for me as somebody who has to pay the rent, or for me as, well...
No, I'm not asking economically.
One thing literature really can do, well, what literature did for me for quite a long time when I was young, it gave me the feeling you're not alone. So I wanted to somehow share that feeling. But it did more than that. There is a relationship between the author and the reader. And it can be a very intimate relationship. And for this you want, as an author, the biggest possible audience to make that contact. So that's translation is just one more possibility. And the other thing is, I think I understand what you're trying to say. There is a perception of German literature. And German literature is changing. Germany is changing. The whole world is changing, and that could be a contribution to German-speaking literature, German written literature, to have all the voices who have nothing in common, but are just adding different flavors to what is already there. More than flavors.
why it's so important for me that it's translated. I would basically agree with Selim. And the other day I had not a reading but a talk with the Kurdish Center in New York City. There is like, as in many big cities, there are Kurdish centers, and they read the book and were very interested in talking to me and asking me questions about the writing process, but also, of course, about the Kurdish experience in Germany, and how much we actually connected, and how many similar experiences we made, even though this group is based in New York and we are here in Germany. And in this book, it's about, as you said, a western city in Germany. And there was one scene that kind of touched one woman, because she said she was confused that lahmacun would be called Turkish pizza, because German people don't know what lahmacun is, and but she was kind of sad because she said even there are Kurdish restaurants, they would not say that there are Kurdish restaurants, because then they are in a very vulnerable position and fear to be, for example, attacked. And this kind of experience I also made, that a lot of times you go to a restaurant and then at the very end when you pay something and just drop a Kurdish word, and then you are like, you're Kurdish? Oh, okay. And this is kind of, so there is this universal experience which Kurdish people make, or global experience, that they cannot just show that they are Kurdish, but have to, even though they are in exile and in the diaspora, that they still have to hide. And that was kind of, this passage was touching her, and I thought that was, even though it's a very sad experience, it's still kind of, it showed me like the connection and how important it is to, also for people in New York, Kurdish people in New York, to know what is going on here and sharing this experience.
And there's a long tradition of Kurdish writers writing not in Kurdish, of course, because of repression. I mean, like Yaşar Kemal, for instance, one of the most famous Turkish speaking writers. So that's there. The translation also then brings together maybe an international community that is separated through political violence.
Yes, and that is kind of a bittersweet thing, because so we are persecuted because of our language, and then start to write in German and English. So and that these languages connect us, and in these languages we communicate. So it's it's very ambivalent.
Thank you, Karosh. We are coming to an end, but if anyone wants to ask a question and is strong enough to bear the answer, that's the chance to do so. There is someone strong enough.
Hi, I have a question for the translation duo. And this goes back to your discussion previously about what that process actually looked like, and working together and translating not just one but 3 books together. And I tend to think of translation in general as a collaborative effort always, because it's always, first of all, you negotiating another author's language, but also you're never completely an expert on anything, so you're always drawing on other resources. I'm curious what the extent was to which this was
three-person translation process? Like, how much did you work with Selim? Was he part of some of the discussions, some of the conversations you had? And what did that look like? How did that affect your sort of two-way translation process?
Thank you. It was, to some extent, a three-way process. Certainly, if neither of us understood something, we could always go back to him. We did have a discussion about one thing early on, so when we were translating the first book, when we were making kind of fundamental decisions, actually. And that was that in the German, maybe Selim would like to talk about it, but he, as far as I understand, and I'm putting words into his mouth now, he wanted as many German-speaking readers to understand as much as possible, and was... No. Yeah, you see, thin ice.
No problem.
He wanted to avoid what he saw as kind of orientalizing things by putting them in the original Turkish and putting them in italics so that people could be like, oh wow, what is this exotic dish? But he translates everything like into German, but we didn't want to do that. So that was our first email exchange, wasn't it? Whether to what we would call simit, and we called simit. Partly because we thought that in the time that had passed, more people would be familiar with what simit was, and there are even like chains that sell simit in London, in the centre of London now. Whoa! But also, it's the thing that came up was that the relationship between, if you use the word, is that creating a sort of a degree of distance that is kind of more alienating, or is it kind of alienating if you to translate everything as if you don't know yourself what the word is, and we decided to use the actual words.
Yeah, I mean, partly as well because, for my feeling, the English language is very welcoming to foodstuffs, and it's certainly an area where it's traditionally been very easy for things to be incorporated into the culture as through our stomachs. So that was that's a good example of how we worked together, three of us.
Yeah. But Selim is really hands off.
Yeah.
His first message was just like, "Yeah, I trust you. Have at it." Would you agree?
I'm not always like that.
No? Just say you're not
it's
a
just like
relaxed
the
person.
best feeling. One of the best feelings one can have. Like, okay, I can trust them. Mm-hmm. They will do it.
You already trusted Katy a lot.
Yeah.
And I trusted. Katy is the kind of the core of the triad. Does a triad have a core? Whatever. But yeah, you and I don't know.
Well, we'd known each other for years, so yeah, it was a delight, all from beginning to end, working with the two of you. I'm trying not to cry.
Yeah, I trust you as well. I would rather finish the discussion here and with a big thank you for your work, like both the writers and the translators. And thank you for presenting the work and discussing it here with me and with each other. And thank you to the audience for listening to us. Buy the books, spread the word. Everybody should know that Karosh, Taha, and Selim Özdoğan are available in English now.